I jumped the music
Oh
there.
yeah, you got to
Producer
wait
Dan.
for the music.
This is what happens when Doug is away. Hey everybody, I'm Robb Ryerse, co-host of the Vote Common Good Politics podcast on Tuesdays. I'm here with Dan Deitrich, who we often refer to as Producer Dan, because our fearless leader Doug Padgett is down on the border, scouting out plans and needs for the bike ride that Vote Common Good is sponsoring. It's the We the People bike ride, September 10th through November 14th. They're going to be starting in California and ending up in Florida and going the entire length of the southern border of the United States to bring some awareness to a common good immigration policy.
Yeah.
And encourage you to check that out. If you'd like to ride with us, man, we would love to have you on a bike, for a day, for a week, for 3 months, whatever it might be, whatever works for you. We would love to have you be a part of the We the People ride. If you can't make it to the border to participate in that, there are ways that you can ride in your local community, maybe even sponsor a ride in your local community. And so go to wethepeopleride.org and check that out. And that's where Doug is. He's down there working on plans for the We the People ride. And so he has left the shop to you and me. Dan, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's exciting. I forget if I've asked you, are you doing any part of the ride? Are you getting down there with us? Or should I?
We shall see.
Should I use peer pressure to get you down?
Yeah. Based on the number on the scale this morning, was a number I personally was not very comfortable with. I probably need to get out and do some riding, but I know that my wife is very interested in participating in the ride, so it looks like she's probably going to be heading down for more of it than I will this time around. I walked from Charlottesville to Washington, D.C.
You did that walk.
And that almost killed me. So I'm not sure how I would do on a ride from California to Florida.
Yeah.
So Dan, there's some stuff going on in the news. Apparently we are still in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
That's not over, regardless of what people think, what people want, what people are hoping, how people act.
Right. It's easy to pretend, but it's still raging.
Exactly. It's one of those things that you can't just close your eyes. It's like a little kid who closes their eyes and thinks that no one else can see them.
Right.
The pandemic's still here, and we're still in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And there's been a number of interesting developments, not the least of which this morning, the CDC announced that they are now recommending that vaccinated people wear a mask indoors in hotspot areas. And as a person who lives in a hotspot area in Arkansas, leading the country in the Delta variant, that's a lot of concern there. It's something that I've mostly been doing anyways, and have continued to encourage our church to do. But this reversal in CDC guidelines shows that we're not out of the woods with this thing yet.
Yeah. Yeah. What does that look like for churches in Arkansas and other places? Are you going to have to go back to virtual, or are you just going to mask up and distance indoors? What does that look like?
Sadly, most churches here in Arkansas have been back to normal, unmasked, unsocially distanced for months and months and months and months and months. Mm-hmm. And that has, I think, contributed to why the pandemic continues not just to rage, but to rage badly here. I read an article this morning that referred to the spread of the coronavirus in the state of Arkansas as a forest fire. That's how bad it is. So my church is we have up until this point been following CDC guidelines. So that means we have been asking unvaccinated people to wear masks and to socially distance indoors. We've asked people who are vaccinated to, be wise with how they act, and many of them wear masks anyways. We've got sanitation stations around. We serve our coffee and such outside and encourage there being, all that hanging out before and after church to happen outside rather than inside. But now with these new CDC guidelines, we're going to go back to asking even vaccinated people to wear masks indoors, and we've got a real high participation rate with that, which is a really good thing. But I fear that we are a bit of an anomaly in New York, here in Arkansas, and frankly, it's been church going folks and conservative people. Though not exclusively, there's certainly a lot of folks kind of more on the progressive side of things that are uninterested in getting the vaccine for a variety of reasons. But a big chunk of people that haven't gotten the vaccine yet are, Fox News watching, Republican voting, Trump supporting folks. And it's been interesting how there's not just been a about face with CDC guidelines, there's been a bit of an about face with some of the messaging coming from Republicans and conservative leadership. Isn't that right,
Yeah,
Dan?
it feels like whiplash. I mean, it feels like it's been a year of hardcore, don't let the government tell me what I should or should not put in my body. And from, all the politicians on the right and all the talking heads, it's been aggressively anti-vax. And it seems like in the last week, it's just been 180-degree turn. And in your home state here, we got Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Presumptive governor of Arkansas.
Presumptive governor. She put out an op-ed that urged people to get inoculated with the, quote, Trump vaccine. And it's just, I'm glad that folks are kind of getting on board with the vaccine and encouraging others to get it. It feels a little bit like too little too late. Like people are dead because of the messaging around vaccines. And I guess better late than never, but
now, Dan, do you have a cynical viewpoint of this? Are you cynical? Do you think that they're afraid of their voters dying and literally losing votes? Do you think like Bette Midler does, who tweeted, I think yesterday, tweeted that these Republican leaders and talking heads on Fox News and whatnot that have changed their tune have probably invested in the companies that made the pharmaceuticals, that made the vaccines? So like, are you cynical in some way about this, or do you think this is kind of they've had a light bulb moment of, oh no, we've got to shift course here for the good of the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the question for me is, what level of cynicism can I keep myself out of? I'm definitely skeptical that all of a sudden, dozens and dozens of Republican spokespeople decided on their own that they're going to just do the right thing and encourage people to get the vaccine that most of them already have. And so I do wonder, like, what was the tipping point? Was it an internal memo that showed, like, hey, the margins in some of these states are razor thin. If 10,000 people of our people die, yeah, literally we'll lose the state. I don't know if that was a factor or if just enough. It seems like if the virus hasn't affected you personally, it hasn't affected your family personally, it's easy to ignore or think it's not such a big deal. But I feel like it's getting closer and closer to home for a lot of people, and it's hard to ignore at that point. So maybe it's a bit of both. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that it is. I don't want to be as cynical as it would take to say, this is a political strategery, to use a George W. Bush word, that is calculated with, margins of victory in states and districts around the country, that is like, ooh, that is a
Yeah,
level of
that's dark.
cynical that, yeah. Um, on the other hand, I do think they're clearly with the number, either somebody convened a call of all these Republican leaders and said, hey, we got like, this isn't right, and convinced them, or it seems like it's too much to be coincidental.
Yeah.
Now, what's really interesting, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about Arkansas. This is an Arkansas politics podcast, though that would be fascinating in and of itself. The Arkansas state legislature passed a law making it illegal for schools and government agencies to have mask mandates, um, and that includes like local municipalities. So individual cities, can't have mask mandates here in Arkansas. Basically, they have unmasked the state at the very time when we have 40% of people who have been vaccinated, and the 60% of people are unvaccinated, and very few people are wearing masks, and so like that's kind of the tone and tenor here in the state. And for Sarah Huckabee Sanders to come out and to be so kind of pro-vaccine while running for governor actually puts her at odds with a number of her own voters,
Hmm.
and Republican leadership in the state. It's going to be interesting to see what her opponent, our Attorney General Leslie Rutledge, does in response. If she doubles down on the anti-vax thing and the anti-mask thing as a way of appealing to those people who might be turned off by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, compromising and parroting the talking points of the deep state,
Yeah.
I'm curious like what kind of political impact this will have here in Arkansas, and I will certainly keep an eye on that and report back. But I think we're definitely seeing a shift in the perspective of folks, whether that is motivated, and frankly, at the end of the day, I'm not sure I care what's motivating it.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's cynical. I don't care if it's profit oriented. If the people who should have been all along messaging loudly and clearly that people need to be vaccinated and call it the Trump vaccine, I don't care who gets the
Right.
credit. What I care is that people get vaccinated, and we move forward with life. Post pandemic, we are not yet post pandemic, and people need to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
And we are just, and so whatever means necessary, like, that
Yeah.
I think that's important, and I'm happy about the messaging now.
For sure. I do wonder if, like, Republicans have created this monster in a sense of like deep skepticism of the vaccine. And
Yeah.
it's like once you spend so many hours and months and a year basically being skeptical, how easy is it to just flip the switch and say, no, you should get it now?
Yeah.
Is it going to work? Is our
Right.
vaccination numbers going to go up because of this messaging? I hope so. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating thing, especially because most of the polling shows that the people who aren't yet vaccinated have really dug in their heels and decided that they're not going to get vaccinated, and nothing's going to change their minds.
Mm-hmm.
No amount of a free lottery ticket if you get vaccinated is gonna incentivize people to do it. That ridiculousness happened here in Arkansas, and it. I wonder what it will take. A part of me thinks, well, it will take an outbreak at a school, because here again here in Arkansas, schools are not allowed to have mask mandates, and so I think it's something like 40% of teachers have been vaccinated, and it's just a matter of time before we've got significant school closings as a result of
Yeah.
a COVID outbreak happened to it. There's a real prestigious summer program called Governor's School that happens in Little Rock each year. It got shut down because of a COVID outbreak just this last week. And, so part of me thinks, well, once schools start shutting down, that will be the thing. But, schools getting shot up
Didn't change anything.
wasn't enough to change gun
Yeah.
policy. So, maybe it's not. It's,
Yeah.
things seem, I tend to be a pretty optimistic, upbeat kind of guy, but this is one of those situations where, it seems pretty desperate, and
Yeah.
and for whatever reason, whoever is kind of beating the drum of you need to get vaccinated, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And the funny thing too is Donald Trump could have been the hero of this story. Like, it was a nationwide crisis. It didn't have to become a political thing. But for some reason he picked a side on this.
Yes. If he had just said everybody needs to wear a mask and then had red "Make America Great Again" masks for sale.
Yeah.
Like, the bungling of this is just
no.
Yeah.
Could have been could have been the hero and could have made a bunch of money on those MAGA masks. But real missed opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything more enjoyable, more fun that we can talk about, Dan?
Well, I thought about moving from Arkansas to Cleveland.
Well, this is
and I was going to say it's not political, but in this day and age, everything gets political. So you change the name of a sports team and you got to take political sides.
That's right. Well, I feel like this is it's the Robb podcast today, because I grew up in Cleveland, huge Cleveland sports fan. I actually have right over here in my office a large picture of the Terminal Tower in Cleveland. So I'm deep with Cleveland sports, and the big news this week: the Cleveland baseball team, formerly known as the Indians, has changed their name to the Guardians. Naming themselves essentially after a couple of statues that are on the Hope Memorial Bridge over the Cuyahoga River as you head into Cleveland. Not far from Progressive Field, there are two very large statues that are the guardians of the city, and so they named their baseball team after a couple of statues. I'm okay with the name Guardians. I think I would have liked Spiders better. That was in the
that
mix.
in the running? Spiders?
Yeah, because it goes way back to I think the very first baseball team in Cleveland was called the Spiders. I would have been okay with the Spiders. I think that would have been fun. Guardians seems a little blah and a little bland to me. A lot of folks wanted something like Rocks or something like that, because Cleveland rocks. But the problem with that is the Rockies already exist, and so that's too close. So Guardians was the name. Part of me thinks they picked Guardians simply because it ends with the same letters that the word Indians does. But I got to tell you, I'm fine with the name. The logo, on the other hand, oh man.
It's been a while since I've seen like a good sports team logo, but this is amongst the worst.
So we've got the baseball because it's a baseball team.
Got it.
We've got the G for Guardians.
Okay. We've
got the wings because the Guardians on the bridge have wings, and they're named after statues on a bridge. And then I think the idea here is a split finger fastball. It kind of has that look of like, a split finger fastball that would be thrown. But if you've got to think that hard about it, it's just not good. Dan, this is not good.
And like the block letter G, it looks like something I would have drawn in like first grade. Like,
yeah, it's not good. I can't, I don't understand this logo at all.
In all these decisions, is it just like death by committee? Like, is it like, well, this is the least problematic thing we can come up with, I guess this is it?
I don't know. And I mean, I'm a person who's long had issues with the Cleveland baseball team's logo. My Indians hat that I have has the block C on it. And when I got it, it had the little tag on the back that had Chief Wahoo on it, a racist caricature. And I immediately cut that off. And when the Indians stopped using Chief Wahoo as a mascot, I was all in favor of that. So I have long had problems with my baseball team's logo. I had problems with the racist nature of their logo previously. Now I just have a problem with the ineptitude of this logo. This is bad. This is bad. I'd love to see, folks that are watching on Facebook or listening. I'd love to, get your take on this logo. I just think it's bad. It's bad.
It's very bad. Yeah, I'm glad to see though that teams are finally getting around to changing their racist names.
Yep.
It still blows my mind that it's taken this long.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, the most egregious was the Washington football team, which was just, you just could not believe that like that name endured for so long.
Right.
Not a big fan of Washington football team as a name, but it sounds like they're going to be picking a new one and are going to be moving forward with something new. Sounds like what long had been rumored that they were going to be the Warriors is now off the table, and they're not going to be the Warriors, but they're going to be something else. So now it's a matter of the football team in Kansas City, the baseball team in Atlanta, a number of college football teams, have some decisions to make about what they're going to do, and if things are going to change.
Yeah.
Yep. If things are going to change now. Yeah. But frankly, as a Cleveland sports fan, I'm good with the Guardians. Jim just commented that it looks like they chose the losing logo. It's true. It's like, they had like the mark of the graphics people had like all of these choices, and they accidentally picked the one that got the least votes. They thought that was like, it was like a game of Survivor or something. I think, So, hey, Marie doesn't hate it.
That's good.
There you go, Marie.
That's better than hating it. So.
Yep. I mean, I will, when I get a new Cleveland Guardians hat to replace my Cleveland Indians hat, I'll make sure that it's just got a C on it and it doesn't have that ridiculous split fastball logo that I just think is absolutely terrible. Did you know, Dan? I noticed, and again, this is because I grew up in Cleveland, and so I'm in deep in Cleveland sports. There is another Cleveland Guardians.
What do you mean?
It is a semi-professional roller derby team named the Cleveland Guardians that apparently, when a reporter reached out and asked them about the new name of the baseball team, they replied with a no comment, which makes me think that the Cleveland Guardians semi-professional roller derby team is about to have a pretty big payday.
It's amazing.
Yeah, who knew the
new
world
gear
needed
for the roller derby team?
Cleveland Guardians. There's multiple Cleveland Guardians out there.
But yeah, it seems like all the good animals are taken. I mean, if you're left thinking about spiders as your mascot, it's bottom of the barrel situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been interesting, though, to bring it all back to politics. I saw a few, I forget if it was a congresswoman or if she's running for Congress, from Colorado maybe, tweeted about how basically the woke police are getting out of control with all these name changes, and we should be able to have our racist team names because that's America. And she went on this long list of all the terrible names that she loves, and then she threw in like Robert E. Lee in there too. And it was like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
because they're in the process in Tennessee of like removing Confederate statues from the state house and erasing history, quote unquote.
Yeah. I live in a town that has a Robert E. Lee, and a Robert E. Lee Elementary School, and that's a real thing that continues to be around.
Yeah. Yeah. When you talk about renaming things, I remember being on the tour and our friend Genesis B would do this piece and talk about how when she graduated high school, she had to walk across the stage with like a Confederate war criminal's name on the side of the school. Like,
Yeah. Crazy.
so messed up that we're still living this history.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everything comes back to politics, and the
Exactly.
anti-woke like movement is a big part of church too. I don't know like how much you've been seeing, like there's books now about like the battle against wokeness, and
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that's been taking place, particularly within the Southern Baptist Convention, and the stuff with critical race theory and all of that. It's just it's the battles that exist, the things that are being talked about and dealt with, you know are everywhere. They
yeah.
are in all aspects of things. Yeah. Um, All right. So, Dan, have you been watching the Olympics at all? I got to tell you, um, you know, um,
I have been. Yeah,
have you?
I watched a little bit of saw some gymnastics and some little bit of swimming. Man, the gymnastics is so wild because you've got to do like 5 very different sports all in a row. Like you got to twirl around on a pommel horse. You got to launch yourself like from this thing, and then you're twirling on 2 poles, and then you got to just bounce around on the mat and do flips. And I can't do any one of those things on their own.
True. So I have not watched a minute of the Olympics this time around. And so let me ask you this. What's the situation with, delays, and, are you seeing things live, or is everything pre-taped? Are you trying to avoid spoilers? How does that work?
Not overly concerned with spoilers. But yeah, I was watching some replays without commentary, which is kind of nice. You don't have to, typically, the commentary from those guys is like, well, that was the worst performance of his life. And you're like, well, that looked great to me. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah. It's so interesting. I don't know if you saw the controversy with the U.S. soccer team, the U.S. women's soccer team, but seemed like there were a lot of very patriotic Americans who were rooting against our own soccer team because we had a number of soccer players who were kneeling during the national anthem to bring awareness to police violence around the country against Black and brown people, and the very patriotic Americans, cheering for our own team to lose. So,
What a world.
yeah. Well, listen, we have got a special guest who's going to be chatting with us. Her name is Julie Oliver. Julie is the executive director of Ground Game Texas, which is an organization that is looking to expand the electorate in Texas and to help stop the spread of Trumpism through the Republican Party by beating them at the ballot box, and doing that through registering new voters and helping to grow the electorate. So, Julie, thank you so much for being with us. It's great to see you today. I wore my fun glasses in honor of you being on the call because Julie's a fun glasses kind of person.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And my
Yeah.
glasses are made of wood.
Yeah,
So it's
the sides of mine are as well. So there we go.
nice.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel left out. I'm going to go get my glasses right now.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Dan. So, Julie, tell us about the work of Ground Game Texas, and this is a relatively new initiative. Tell us about what you all are up to and what your strategy is as Texas has continued to move more and more purple. What's the strategy and what are y'all up to?
All right. Well, thank you. Again, thank you for having me on. Ground Game Texas really was born out of, two congressional campaigns, my own and Mike Siegel's.
Mhm.
And we took the helm of a voter registration nonprofit, and it really does seek to expand the electorate through registering folks who, in Texas primarily is where it started, but we do it everywhere across the United States, but at scale by mail. So if you have moved, but you've not updated your voter registration, we try to preemptively find those folks and send them a voter registration form to complete. So hopefully there are no surprises when they go to vote on election day. But Ground Game seeks to continue the work after registration by finding issues that are incredibly popular, that have broad support across the political spectrum, and put them directly on the ballot. And we've seen that in other states like Florida. Florida passed a minimum wage of $15 an hour last November. Missouri expanded Medicaid. South Dakota decriminalized marijuana. Nebraska enacted some payday lender reforms, and they capped interest of payday lenders. My husband likes to call these issues, they're incredibly popular. It's workers, wages, and weed. So things that benefit workers, whether it's paid time off, giving them the right to collectively bargain and organize, whether it's increase in wages or decriminalizing marijuana, which we know fundamentally at its heart is a criminal justice issue that is very indiscriminately enforced. And typically, Black and Brown people bear the brunt of enforcement when it comes to marijuana possession cases. And I'll share with y'all real quick, in Texas, we cannot do a statewide ballot. We are precluded from doing so. So we have to bring direct democracy to folks city by city. And that's what we are seeking to do, especially around marijuana legislation. In Austin, we are seeking to end enforcement of all marijuana possession cases with 3 carve-outs. 1, if public safety is an issue. 2, if a violent crime has been committed. And 3, if it's part of a larger narcotics investigation. But again, what we found is that there is, the enforcement when it comes to marijuana possession cases is typically borne on the shoulders of the Black and Brown communities in our cities and across Texas.
Yeah. Wow. Really great work. It strikes me from a strategic point of view that when people talk about, well, how do we win elections? How do we flip districts? And part of it is a matter of trying to change people's minds, but that's a really hard thing to do. The persuasion component is really, really difficult. But if you can grow the electorate by registering new voters, you've got the opportunity to win elections that you weren't able to win previously simply by recognizing that getting people registered to vote and then having issues like workers, wages, and weed to energize them. Those are the things that are going to bring them out to the polls. So I'm curious about that strategy. If that's a winning strategy in Texas, and particularly, I think from some numbers I was looking at, it looks like Texas has one of the lowest percentages of registered voters, of those who are eligible to be registered, something like only 54% or something like that. So if you look at how are you going to win if only half of the people are registered and only half of them actually turn out to vote, we've got a very small percentage of people that are making the decisions on elections, that this is a strategy to expand the electorate, to bring more people into the process and to be able to win as a result of that.
I love it. And I am a math person. And since you brought up the math, I love that. You are right. We're barely over 50% of people who would be eligible to vote in Texas actually even being registered to vote. And then we have one of the lowest turnout rates. So of the folks who are actually registered to vote, we typically have anywhere from 50 to maybe 60%. Presidential election brings out more folks. But in a midterm, we see it hovering around 50%. So right there, you're at only 25% of the electorate is voting, or the eligible electorate is voting. And then if you carve out like who actually is winning the elections, then you basically have maybe 13% of eligible folks who could vote deciding the laws of your state, deciding the trajectory you're on. So when folks say that, so-and-so won by a majority of voters, not true. Not true. They won by about 13% of eligible voters. So I just want to bring it down to the math. But what we found in other states that have decriminalized marijuana, and we do have a lot of people saying, well, why would you pick marijuana initially? Because it's incredibly popular. It is the one thing that can turn out two types of vote that we need to turn out in Texas: the youth vote and the non-voter vote. And in states that have decriminalized marijuana, they've seen such a surge in both populations, the youth vote and the non-voting, the people who are registered to vote, but they don't actually show up to vote. They turn out to vote when decriminalization of marijuana is on the ballot. And guess what? You're right. They can then go down the ballot and vote for progressives on the ballot, the people who align with their ideals. So that's where we see a huge opportunity in Texas to maybe energize some voters who typically don't show up in the off years. And I say off years, I wish we never thought of things in terms of off years and midterms. I wish every election was a presidential election. But maybe we can spur that enthusiasm by having these very popular initiatives on the ballot that will get some new leadership in our state.
Yeah.
Why are people not registered to vote? Like what causes somebody to think, well, this isn't all that important, I'm not going to bother doing that?
Well, I don't know that people necessarily think that it's not all that important. In Texas, they just have made it ridiculously hard. And I'll give you an example. I ran for Congress in 2020. So on election day, November 3rd, 2020, I was in Killeen, Texas. Killeen sits outside of Fort Hood, the largest military installation in the United States. And I saw 2 soldiers get turned away and not be able to vote because they were not registered in Texas. And what happens in Texas is we shut down voter registration for an election 30 days in front of that election. So if you were deployed to Texas 5 days before November 3rd, guess what you cannot do? You cannot vote in Texas. And by election day, it's too late to request a ballot. And so if you've grown up in a state where you can register to vote at the ballot box and you move to Texas, well, surprise, surprise, guess what you're not going to do? Register to vote at the ballot box. They don't even have, I can't even imagine why we don't have voter registrars at polling locations. Somebody may not be able to vote in that election, but they can vote in future elections if they get registered that day. And so what you have is people who are turned away. They probably become very disincentivized to go back. And, in Texas, we have this thing called the volunteer deputy registrar laws. And what that means is if you try to help somebody get registered to vote, and y'all have all seen voter registration forms, it's not rocket science. First, last name, your birthday, your address, check in a box that says you're, 18, check in a box that says you're a citizen. If you take that form from somebody and you are not deputized in the county where they live, you have committed a state jail felony.
Wow.
So clearly they are trying to disincentivize people from getting other people registered to vote. So it's challenging. It's not that I think people have apathy towards it. I think Texas puts so many barriers, and they're trying right now to put even more barriers in front of people to vote because they realize they can win on a 13%. With 13% of the vote, or I should say 13% of voters voting.
Yeah.
But they can't if more people turn out.
Yeah. Julie, you mentioned that it's getting harder to vote. Across the country, states are trying to make it harder to vote. What specifically is going on in Texas? What sort of laws are they trying to pass?
Well, limiting the times that polling locations can stay open. We do have early voting in Texas, but limiting the times that polling locations can stay open. Harris County, the largest county in Texas, has Houston in it, did some really innovative things to allow it to be easier to vote, including they had mega centers, so that they would have, 100 machines in a location so people were not waiting 6 and 7 hours to vote. They had 24-hour voting, so folks who work, especially think about our folks in the service industry who might get off at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and might want to go vote because they're still awake.
Yeah.
They had 24-hour polling locations. They had drive-through voting. Texas wants to end all of it. They want to end, at least in the original version of the bill that went through the regular session, they wanted to end souls to the polls, which is a huge national event to get Black church congregants to the polls after a Sunday service. And they wouldn't allow polls to open until 1 o'clock on Sundays. Well, you can't tell me that an election is unsafe, insecure at 12 o'clock noon on a Sunday, but not at 1 o'clock noon on a Sunday. And by the same token, you can't tell me that an election is safe and secure at 7 p.m., but if somebody steps into line at 7:01 p.m., it's suddenly insecure and unsafe.
Yeah.
I mean, it defies logic. Again, they're just doing things intentionally to disenfranchise voters, to keep them from voting so that they can consolidate their wealth and their power, because that is what's behind the leadership in Texas right now, wealth and power.
Yeah. So are the Democratic lawmakers who had fled the state because of the special session to keep that law from being passed and to keep the quorum from being there, are they back in the state? What's the latest on that? Those of us who live in other states, we've kind of moved on to other things, but I imagine that's something that is, continue front and center for you.
So for those of the folks who are watching who may not know what happened in Texas, our Texas Democratic legislators on the House side broke quorum. They fled the state, meaning they had to leave the state because Greg Abbott can send law enforcement after them if they stay in the state. And they went to D.C. to lobby our senators specifically to please modify the filibuster and get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and H.R. 1S1 passed, so that we can deal with what these states are doing, these very, very onerous restrictions in voting rights, so that we can deal with it at a federal level, because clearly the states are trying to limit that. So they left Austin. We were in special session to deny quorum to the Republicans. I'm so grateful for him. One Democrat came back to Texas. His name is Harold Dutton, but he also stayed behind the first time and was going to vote. He is not supporting our Texas Democrats in this fight against voter suppression, and it is very disheartening. He's made a couple of other really poor votes on permitless carry in Texas, so that you do not have to have a permit to carry a gun on your person in Texas. And
wild.
He's the chair of the Education Committee, and he is the one who introduced legislation on the House side that would prohibit trans students from participating in student sports if they are not playing according to the gender they were assigned to at birth. Yeah, so he is not participating with the other courageous and heroic House Democrats who have left.
Mm-hmm. And are they still in D.C.? They haven't returned yet?
They have not returned yet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Julie,
so they're missing time with their families and their constituents, and
How long do they have to wait, to run the clock out on this special session?
Well, special sessions last 30 days, but Greg Abbott has also sworn to recall legislative session after legislative session. So I'm not sure how many bites at the apple we have, and I really do hope that our Democratic senators take filibuster reform very, very seriously, and I hope our president does as well. Mm-hmm. It's silly to have an archaic rule that really is an anti-democratic rule. It's not legislation. It's an anti-democratic rule that is holding our democracy hostage.
Yeah.
Because
that's the only way. That's the only way, right? Is we reform the filibuster, or else this Texas law and so many other state laws will get pushed through, right?
That's correct. And if we don't reform the filibuster sooner rather than later, some of these laws that will get passed, even if we do have judicial review of states who have typically, tried to disenfranchise voters, like Texas, if it will not be retroactive. So if we redraw district lines and they found that, Texas was intentionally trying to disenfranchise pockets of voters, we're stuck with it until the next redistricting. So we need filibuster reform now.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, how are you feeling about the midterms in Texas? Are you feeling optimistic, or like what's your sense? Because personally, and Dan knows this from being on the podcast with me, I'm absolutely terrified about the midterms. Historical precedent shows that the party that doesn't have the White House wins big. And so, we're poised for Republicans to win big. And it's not just Republicans; it's the type of Republicans that are going to win big. The type of Republicans are going to be Trump-supporting Republicans, and so personally, I'm just absolutely terrified about the midterms. Can you either talk me off the ledge, or would you like to sit next to me on the ledge? Because I'm that's kind of where I'm at. Where are you at?
Straddle that ledge myself because I am nervous. Again, if we don't have filibuster reform, the clock is ticking on us. We have less than 18 months to pass some very important legislation, especially to protect voting rights. We realize there is a segment of our country that believes somebody else won the election who did not win the election. I want to be very clear about that. Biden won, and he won mightily, and the fact that we could have a segment of our population that wants to dismantle our democracy to install an authoritarian autocrat is terrifying. Of course it should. We should all be incredibly vigilant. We should not be sitting on our hands or leading the lives we led prior to 2016 when Trump got elected and we were, fairly apathetic about who was in the White House. Mm-hmm. We should be incredibly concerned because our country is going to go one direction or another in 2022. And it's a direction of, progress and reform and inclusion and helping people, or it's one that's going to be I think it will be the systematic dismantling of what we know as democracy in America. Mm. And so, yes, I think we should be incredibly vigilant and be engaged and do everything that we can to preserve democracy. By the same token, I do think that there are things that we can do right here, right now. Again, we should not be looking at 2021 as an off year. There are things that we can do right now to organize. Getting folks registered to vote, especially the folks who have a challenging time getting registered to vote, helping communities get registered to vote, talking to them. There are a number of nonprofits that are doing deep canvassing this year. And I think of People's Action as a wonderful nonprofit organization that does deep canvassing. Did incredible work in Arizona that helped change the tide of Arizona. So it works. Having conversations with people work. What Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, talking about Medicaid expansion and what that would mean for Georgia, that's a form of deep canvassing. And she got people engaged in an issue and wanting to vote. And so you can get folks, even if you're not enthused or you don't know who's running in 2022, you can get people enthusiastic about issues that can be on the ballot and about what it means. What does their vote mean? It's sad when you meet somebody who's like, I don't vote because my life has not changed when I do. And it's really sad when you meet people who won't sign your petition because they're white males who say, I don't need to sign your petition to decriminalize marijuana because nothing's going to ever happen to me. And I apologize. I have a cat in the background who's not happy right now. I love it. We have a baby kitten in our house, and the older cat is not happy at all. My daughter is basically babysitting somebody else's kitten right now. Anyway, short story long, yes, I think we need to be nervous about 2022, but there are things that we can do and we should not rest. We should be actively pursuing all means necessary to keep our democracy alive. And, talking to people is the best way to do that.
Yeah. Julie, I'm on groundgametexas.org. Great website. I love the font choices.
Thank you.
But there's a little bullet that says no community left behind and talks about rural communities specifically. What is or what should be the Democratic messaging to rural communities? I feel like it's something Democrats have either avoided because it's not worth it to them, or they just don't know how to talk to people outside of urban communities.
Right. I'd still say workers, wages, and weed. Keeping it simple. No, but there are obviously a number of issues in rural Texas that folks who live in urban communities don't experience as much, or I should say to the extent. When you really don't have any viable way to connect to high-speed internet in rural Texas, we clearly need broadband out there. It's living in a pandemic world. We've seen so many people start to connect remotely to work and to school. People need, and to churches. People need that opportunity in rural Texas just as much as they do right here in Austin or in Dallas. And to that extent, we really do need to make broadband accessible to everybody, every household, including our lower income households who may not be able to afford a $70 a month high-speed internet connection. When you talk about healthcare, it's incredibly important to rural communities because typically recruiting talent, doctors, nurses, technicians to rural Texas is very, very challenging, but also keeping community hospitals open is very, very challenging. When you don't have the pool of patients that an urban center has, including insured patients, which typically prop up the uninsured population because we have a very broken healthcare system right now. One of the best things that we could do truly for rural Texas is Medicare for all. Allow everybody to have health care, regardless of where they live, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of job. So there are, again, a number of issues that benefit everybody, but in rural Texas and in rural communities probably mean a little bit more. Climate change is devastating farmers and ranchers, you know, and I don't see climate change being addressed in rural Texas, but it's a very real problem that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
All of us.
Julie, I two things, as we kind of wind down today. One is if people are listening and they're like, yeah, this makes so much sense to me, I'm in. What can they do? Where can they go? How can they help? And then the second question is, how did you get into this? Like, why? I know this is kind of birthed out of your congressional campaign, but what got you involved in all of this stuff to begin with?
Well, to get involved, we do have a get involved button, I think, or join us button on Ground Game Texas. But, people can also, if they want to say, well, I don't live in Texas, what can I do in my state? Connect with me. My email's julie@groundgametexas.org. Connect with me and I'll find you an organization to connect with because I think your talents are needed. I mean, volunteers are so incredibly important to every nonprofit. So we can find something for you. Secondly, how did I get involved? Well, initially, I ran for Congress because I had a son who has a healthcare issue, and it became very, very important to our family when in 2017, the United States House of Representatives, under Republican control, voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Again, I don't think the Affordable Care Act goes far enough. I wish we had Medicare for all, but it is what we have right now, and I don't want it going anywhere. But after my election in 2020, when I lost and I really wanted to give up on my state, I thought it's beyond redemption. I drove to Georgia and I knocked doors for the Ossoff and Warnock campaigns. And I saw what real organizing for years does. It works. It engages people. It energizes people. It can move people to change voting behaviors from non-voting to voting. And so I will say that was probably one of the best therapies I engaged in post-election was going and knocking on doors for other candidates. And I realized it works. It's not just, a candidate begging you to please come help me. It works. And even if you don't want to work for a candidate, there are communities and organizations that are working on issues. So you can do issues-based organizing. And, I'll tell you all this. I found out I'm going to be a grandma in November.
Wow.
Yeah, my oldest
Congrats.
daughter. Thank you. she and her husband are expecting in early November. And I will tell you, I have more reason than ever to keep this fight up and the will to fight up, because the future I see for that young kiddo is a little bit terrifying if we don't address climate change and if we do not preserve our democracy.
Yeah.
So I'm in this fight for the long haul, y'all.
Fantastic. Julie, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for organizing the books on your bookshelf by color as well. That is, I've just so enjoyed looking at that as I've been listening intently to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It matters so much, and we are big fans of Ground Game Texas here at Vote Common Good. And when we are rolling through on the bus through Texas, as we have been in the past, we're gonna make sure we connect with you. Thank you for sharing your story with us today, and giving folks a reason to be hopeful, and some marching orders of what can be done to make a difference. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank everybody for listening in today. The Vote Common Good podcast continues tomorrow with our faith team is going to be talking tomorrow. And until then, we hope you have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.